Cuba is a land of contrasts, resilience, and rhythm, and its story begins long before Havana's streets filled with classic cars and salsa music. The island's first inhabitants were the Taíno and Siboney peoples, who farmed cassava, fished the Caribbean waters, and called their homeland Cubanacan, meaning great place. In 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived and declared Cuba the most beautiful land human eyes had ever seen. Soon, Spanish conquistadors colonized the island, building settlements and turning Havana into a vital port for Spain's empire. But behind the wealth was suffering. Indigenous populations were decimated by disease and conquest, and Africans were brought as slaves to toil in sugar and tobacco fields. Out of this painful history, however, arose Cuba's unique cultural fusion, African rhythms blending with Spanish traditions in music, dance, and daily life. The island became a target for pirates, including the legendary Francis Drake, and fortresses like Castillo del Morro were built to defend Havana. These walls still stand as reminders of a turbulent past. By the 19th century, Cuba was both rich and restless. Sugar had made it a jewel of the Caribbean, but slavery fueled that wealth. Cuban rebels began demanding freedom from Spain. The 10 Years' War in 1868 was the first major push for independence. Though unsuccessful, it planted the seeds of nationalism. The poet and revolutionary José Martí became the symbol of freedom, writing passionately about the dream of an independent Cuba. He died in battle in 1895, but his spirit lived on. Soon after, the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor brought the United States into the Spanish-American War. Spain was defeated, and Cuba was formally independent in 1902. But the U.S. maintained a strong influence, controlling much of its economy and politics. Havana in the 1920s and 1930s became known as the Las Vegas of the Caribbean, filled with American mobsters, casinos, jazz clubs, and glamorous nightlife. Yet beneath the glitter was poverty and inequality. By the 1950s, dictator Fulgencio Batista ruled with corruption and cruelty. In the mountains of the Sierra Maestra, a young lawyer named Fidel Castro and an Argentine doctor named Che Guevara organized a guerrilla revolution. In 1959, Batista fled, and the Cuban Revolution triumphed. Castro promised land reforms, free education, and universal health care. Many Cubans welcomed the changes, but others fled as freedoms were restricted, property was seized, and censorship grew. The U.S. embargo soon cut Cuba off from trade, and tensions escalated into the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when Soviet nuclear missiles were placed on the island. For 13 days, the world teetered on the brink of nuclear war until an agreement was reached to remove the missiles. Though disaster was avoided, Cuba remained isolated and firmly aligned with the Soviet Union. Despite hardship, Cuba developed a reputation for world-class doctors and a literacy campaign that nearly eradicated illiteracy in just 1 year. Cuban doctors now serve in dozens of countries, and education is free for all. The island also became a cultural powerhouse with music, dance, and art flourishing even under economic strain. Life in Cuba is full of surprises. Due to the embargo, Cubans still drive beautifully preserved 1950s American cars, patched together with homemade parts. The island has one of the highest doctor-to-patient ratios in the world. Ballet is a national treasure, and Cuba's school produces world-famous dancers. Coca-Cola is almost impossible to buy officially, making Cuba one of the few places on Earth without it. Internet access only arrived in 2015, and many Cubans still share hard drives called El Paquete to watch TV shows and movies. Cuban cigars remain the most legendary in the world, rolled by artisans whose skills have been passed down for generations. Nearly 20% of the island is protected land, home to stunning biodiversity and pristine nature. Cuba's attractions reflect its layered history and natural beauty. In Havana's Old Town, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, colorful pastel buildings and cobblestone streets come alive with street music and vintage cars. Varadero Beach, with its white sands and turquoise waters, is among the Caribbean's finest. The Viñales Valley, with its green tobacco fields and limestone hills, shows farming traditions unchanged for centuries. Trinidad is a colonial town seemingly frozen in time, where horse-drawn carriages pass brightly painted houses. Santiago de Cuba, on the eastern side, is the cradle of Cuban music and Afro-Cuban culture, birthplace of sun and salsa. Cienfuegos, called the Pearl of the South, reflects French elegance in its architecture. The Bay of Pigs, remembered for the failed U.S. invasion, is now also a world-class diving site. And in the Escambray Mountains, Topes de Collantes offers waterfalls, hiking, and lush forests. Music and dance are perhaps Cuba's greatest treasures. Sun, salsa, rumba, mambo, and cha-cha-cha echo from every corner. A simple walk in Havana might mean stumbling upon a band playing guitar, bongos, and trumpet in the street, while couples dance with effortless grace. To visit Cuba is to step into a living time capsule where history and modern life intertwine daily. The island's story is one of resilience, of people who have endured colonialism, slavery, embargoes, and political battles, yet continue to create beauty, joy, and culture. Cuba is not just a country. It is a rhythm, a heartbeat, and a song of survival and hope.